You think Christmas on the plantation meant generosity for everyone? Think again. For enslaved people, the holiday brought rare scraps wrapped in cruelty, food that told stories of survival and traditions born from almost nothing. Let's dig into 30 cheap Christmas meals served to slaves on plantations. Possum and sweet potatoes was one of the rare Christmas dishes enslaved families could call their own, made from animals trapped in December woods. The possum was cleaned, soaked overnight in salted water, then roasted slowly with sweet potatoes tucked around the edges. The meat turned tender and slightly sweet from the animal's diet of persimmons, while the potatoes absorbed rich drippings until caramelized. This dish appeared at Christmas because it was one of the few times enslaved people had permission to hunt without supervision. Sweet potatoes came from small garden plots tended after required labor was finished. Possum hunting became a Christmas Eve tradition, with fathers and sons heading into woods with torches and dogs. The dish represented both the pain of bondage and the resilience of people who created celebration from the margins, turning wild game into a feast that carried memory, hope, and quiet defiance against a system designed to strip away every dignity. Hog jowl and black-eyed peas carried deep meaning for enslaved communities, especially during Christmas when slaveholders sometimes distributed extra pork rations. The jowl was fatty cheek meat considered undesirable by wealthy families, but treasured in quarters for its rich flavor and ability to season large pots. Black-eyed peas simmered slowly with the jowl until creamy and infused with smoky, salty essence. This combination became associated with luck and prosperity, beliefs enslaved people held fiercely despite their circumstances. One hog jowl could flavor enough peas to feed an entire cabin, stretching limited rations further than seemed possible. Women woke before dawn on Christmas morning to start the pot, knowing it needed hours to reach perfection. The peas were easy to grow and store, making them a reliable staple. This dish was more than sustenance. It was an act of hope, a belief that better days might come despite all evidence to the contrary. Crackling bread was a Christmas treat that transformed hog butchering scraps into something children waited for all year. When slaveholders slaughtered hogs in December, rendered fat left behind crispy bits of skin called cracklings. These golden, crunchy pieces were mixed into cornmeal batter and baked into bread that snapped with each bite. The bread was dense and satisfying, with pockets of salty, porky flavor throughout the golden crumb. Enslaved families considered crackling bread special because cracklings were only available during winter butchering season. Mothers saved the best pieces, hiding them until enough had been collected for a proper batch. The aroma of crackling, bread baking filled small cabins with warmth and anticipation, signaling the holiday had arrived. This simple bread carried enormous emotional weight, a reminder that even within slavery's brutal system, moments of sweetness could be created from scraps others discarded without thought. Molasses cake was the closest thing to dessert most enslaved people would taste at Christmas, baked in cast iron skillets over cabin fires. Molasses was the cheapest sweetener, the dark byproduct of sugar refining that plantation owners considered beneath their tables but distributed to quarters. Mixed with cornmeal or rare wheat flour, eggs when available, and gathered spices, the batter baked into dense, moist cake with deep, almost burnt sweetness. The flavor was intense, far removed from delicate cakes served in the big house, but beloved in its own way. Women who made exceptional molasses cake earned reputations, spreading across plantations, their recipes guarded and whispered. Children hovered near the fire, watching for signs the cake was ready. Each slice represented weeks of careful hoarding, extra molasses saved, flour hidden away, eggs collected one by one until enough existed to create something truly celebratory from almost nothing. Chitlins with hot pepper vinegar was a Christmas dish requiring days of preparation and representing the ultimate example of making treasure from what others discarded. Chitlins, cleaned hog intestines, were given to enslaved workers after butchering because white families refused them. The cleaning process was intensive, requiring multiple soakings in cold water. Once cleaned, chitlins boiled for hours until tender, then served with vinegar spiked with hot peppers that cut through the richness. The powerful, distinctive smell filled quarters with an aroma announcing the holiday. Preparing chitlins was communal, with women gathering to clean and cook while sharing stories and songs. The dish carried African roots, connecting enslaved people to foodways their ancestors practiced before the Middle Passage. Eating chitlins at Christmas became an act of cultural preservation, a way of maintaining identity and community bonds that slavery sought to destroy. Sweet potato pone was a Christmas dessert requiring nothing more than sweet potatoes, molasses, and knowledge passed from mother to daughter across generations. Potatoes were roasted until soft, mashed with molasses, a little lard, and spices like ginger when available. The mixture was pressed into a pan and baked slowly until set into dense, sweet cake that could be sliced and eaten cold over several days. The texture fell somewhere between pudding and candy, smooth and sticky with concentrated sweetness, making children's eyes go wide. Sweet potatoes grew well in small plots. Enslaved families were sometimes permitted to tend, making them one of the few ingredients people could control. The pone represented agency, a dish made entirely from ingredients grown and prepared by enslaved hands without slaveholder involvement. Families made extra pones to share with neighbors, spreading Christmas joy through food when no other gifts were possible. Potlikker with cornbread was perhaps the most humble Christmas meal, yet it nourished bodies and spirits when nothing else was available. Potlikker was cooking water left after boiling greens, collards, turnips, or whatever could be gathered from winter gardens. This broth contained vitamins and minerals leached during cooking, making it genuinely nutritious despite appearing to be mere vegetable water. Enslaved families sipped warm liquor from cups, using cornbread to soak up every drop. The flavor was earthy and green, slightly bitter, but satisfying on cold December nights when cabin walls let in the wind. On Christmas, potlikker might be richer, made from greens cooked with a bit of fatback if rations allowed. Mothers ensured every child received their share, knowing the liquor would ward off winter sickness. This dish taught an essential lesson that nothing should be wasted, that nourishment existed even in what appeared to be scraps. Rabbit stew appeared on Christmas tables when enslaved men managed to trap rabbits in woods surrounding the plantation during scarce personal hours. Rabbits were skinned quickly, cut into pieces, and simmered with wild onions and root vegetables, saved from fall gardens until meat fell from bone. The stew was thin by necessity, never enough fat to make it rich, but hot and filling, warming bellies on the coldest nights. Rabbit hunting required skill passed from fathers to sons, knowledge of where rabbits ran and how to set snares without detection. The meat was lean and mild, absorbing whatever flavors the cook added while providing precious protein regular rations lacked. Families gathered around the single pot, each person receiving a share ladled into whatever vessel they owned. The stew represented self-reliance and small freedoms enslaved people carved within the brutal system, the ability to provide something extra through their own labor and knowledge. Hoe with cane syrup was a Christmas breakfast children remembered for the rest of their lives, simple but touched with rare sweetness. Hoe cakes were cornmeal flatbreads cooked on griddles or flat hoe sides held over fire, a technique giving them their name and connecting them to field labor. The cakes came out crispy at edges and slightly dense in the middle, with subtle corn sweetness needing enhancement. Cane syrup was the answer, thick amber liquid pressed from sugar cane that some plantation owners distributed during Christmas. Drizzled over warm hoe cakes, syrup soaked into every crevice, creating bites of pure comfort. Children licked fingers clean, trying to capture every drop before it disappeared. Mothers made hoe cakes because ingredients were reliable, cornmeal was the staple ration, and the technique required no special equipment. The syrup transformed every day into celebration, proving small luxuries could carry enormous emotional weight for people whose lives contained so few indulgences. Persimmon pudding was a Christmas dessert made from fruit growing wild and free, belonging to no one and therefore available to everyone who knew where to look. Persimmons ripened after first frost, their orange flesh turning from mouth-puckeringly astringent to honey-sweet overnight. Enslaved foragers gathered them by the basketful, mashing soft pulp and straining out seeds to create thick puree. Mixed with cornmeal, molasses, and sometimes milk when available, the batter baked into pudding, tasting like autumn concentrated into every spoonful. The flavor was complex, sweet and earthy with hints of cinnamon and dates, unlike anything else in the limited cuisine available. Persimmon pudding represented knowledge of the land that enslaved communities developed, understanding which wild foods were safe and when to harvest them. This was wisdom passed from African ancestors who had forged their own lands, adapted to American forests, and carried forward as resistance against total control. Ash cakes were the most primitive bread available to enslaved families, made by wrapping cornmeal dough in cabbage leaves and burying it directly in hot fireplace ashes. The technique required no pan, just cornmeal mixed with water and salt, shaped into rounds, wrapped in leaves, and nestled into coals. After 20 minutes, cakes emerged with smoky, slightly charred exterior and dense, steaming interior that tasted like survival itself. At Christmas, ash cakes might be made larger or given extra care, but the method remained unchanged. Children learned to make them young. Understanding this skill might mean the difference between eating and hunger. The cabbage leaves imparted faint green flavor and kept ash from penetrating the dough. Ash cakes represented the absolute baseline of cookery, what could be made when nothing else was available, yet they filled bellies and sustained lives through bondage's cruelest seasons. Collard greens with ham hocks appeared on Christmas tables as one of the most anticipated dishes of the year, simmered for hours until tough leaves turned silky. Collards grew well in southern winters, their broad leaves sweetening after frost. Enslaved cooks stripped leaves from thick stems, washed them multiple times, then packed them into iron pots with whatever ham hock the slaveholder provided. The greens cooked down dramatically, a bushel reducing to few servings as leaves absorbed smoky pork flavor and released mineral-rich liquor. At Christmas, there might be more meat on the bone than usual, making the dish feel almost luxurious. Families passed down specific techniques, when to add vinegar, how much pepper. The greens were eaten with cornbread for soaking up precious potlikker, ensuring nothing was wasted. This dish represented nourishment, tradition, and small mercies that made survival possible. Fried fatback was pure rendered pork fat, sliced thick and fried until edges turned crispy while the center stayed soft and rich. Fatback came from the hog's back, almost entirely fat with thin meat streaks. Slaveholders distributed it as rations because it was cheap and calorie-dense, fueling hard labor. At Christmas, families might fry extra slices or prepare them with more care. The aroma of fatback sizzling in cast iron filled cabins with a smell that meant something good was coming. Eaten on cornbread or alongside greens, fatback provided essential calories, keeping bodies warm through cold nights. Children fought over crispy edges while adults took fattier portions. The dish was simple to the point of primitive, yet it kept enslaved people alive. Fatback represented both the cruelty of a system providing only the cheapest foods and the resilience of people who made those scraps sustaining. Hominy grits with red-eye gravy was a Christmas morning dish, transforming humble corn into approaching comfort. Hominy was made by soaking dried corn in lye until hulls loosened, leaving swollen kernels that were dried and ground into grits. The grits cooked slowly until creamy, requiring constant stirring to prevent scorching. Red-eye gravy was made by deglazing the pan after frying ham with strong black coffee, creating thin, intensely flavored sauce. Poured over grits, the gravy added richness, elevating simple corn porridge into something memorable. Enslaved families might only have red-eye gravy at Christmas when coffee was available and meat drippings plentiful. The combination was filling and warming, stretching limited ingredients into a meal that felt celebratory. Grits carried history. The nixtamalization process, creating hominy, came from indigenous peoples who taught it to both enslaved Africans and European settlers alike. Peanut stew was a dish with direct African roots, brought across the Atlantic in memories of enslaved people who recreated homeland cooking with American ingredients. Peanuts, called ground nuts or goobers, grew easily in southern soil and were sometimes permitted in small garden plots. The nuts were roasted, shelled, and ground into paste, forming the base of thick, satisfying stew. Root vegetables, greens, and whatever meat scraps were available joined the pot, simmering until everything melded into rich, nutty warmth. The flavor was unlike anything in European cooking, earthy and complex with creamy texture coating the tongue. At Christmas, peanut stew might include extra ingredients or be prepared with special care. The dish represented cultural survival, proof that enslaved people maintained connections to African foodways despite every attempt to erase their heritage. Each bowl contained not just nourishment, but memory and quiet resistance. Cornmeal mush with molasses was breakfast, dinner, and sometimes supper, a dish so basic it barely qualified as cooking, yet sustained millions. Cornmeal was the foundation of the enslaved diet, distributed weekly by slaveholders who considered it adequate sustenance. Mixed with water and cooked until thick, the mush was bland and filling, its texture somewhere between porridge and paste. Molasses transformed it, adding sweetness and flavor that made mush worth eating rather than merely endurable. At Christmas, there might be extra molasses, enough to make mush taste almost like dessert. Children learned to stir slowly, preventing lumps while it thickened over fire. Adults ate, knowing this simple food was keeping them alive another day. The dish represented the minimum of nutrition, corn and sugar, calories without joy, yet enslaved families found ways to make even this humble fare feel worth gathering around together. Roasted raccoon was a Christmas dish for families skilled enough to trap the clever animals raiding corn cribs after dark. Raccoons were fatty and flavorful, their meat rich from autumn foraging on nuts and berries. The animal was skinned, cleaned, and often parboiled before being roasted slowly with sweet potatoes. The meat turned dark and tender, with distinctive taste falling somewhere between pork and dark poultry. Trapping raccoons required knowledge passed between generations. where they traveled, what bait they preferred. At Christmas, a successfully caught raccoon meant protein slaveholders hadn't provided, food earned through skill during precious free hours. Families shared the meat with neighbors, spreading bounty across cabins. The dish represented self-sufficiency and small victories enslaved people won against a system designed to control every aspect of existence, turning cunning and patience into feast. Turnip greens with salt pork was a winter dish, making use of hardy vegetables still available when most gardens had gone dormant. Turnips grew well into cold weather, their leafy tops remaining edible even after frost. Enslaved cooks would harvest the greens, wash them thoroughly, and simmer them for hours with whatever salt pork was available, often just a small piece stretched to flavor a large pot. The greens cooked down into a tender, slightly bitter mass infused with smoky pork essence. The cooking liquid was saved and drunk or sopped up with cornbread, extending the meal's nutrition further. At Christmas, the dish might include both the turnip roots and their greens, the white flesh of the turnip adding substance to the pot. Families grew turnips in their small garden plots because they were reliable and required little attention. This dish represented the knowledge of seasonal cooking that enslaved communities developed, understanding which foods remained available through winter and how to make them sustaining. Fried catfish appeared on Christmas tables near plantations with rivers, streams, or ponds where enslaved people were sometimes permitted to fish during their limited free time. Catfish lurked in muddy bottoms, feeding on whatever the water provided, and they could be caught with simple lines and hooks made from bent pins or scavenged metal. The fish were cleaned, rolled in cornmeal, seasoned with salt and whatever pepper was available, then fried in hot lard until the coating turned golden and crispy. The flesh inside stayed white and flaky, with a mild sweetness that made catfish a prized catch. Fishing required patience and knowledge, understanding where fish gathered, what time they fed, how to read water and weather. At Christmas, a successful fishing trip meant protein that hadn't come from slaveholder rations, food that represented freedom in small measure. Families gathered to share the fish, dividing portions carefully so everyone received a taste of something special earned through their own skill. Sweet potato biscuits were a Christmas treat, stretching precious wheat flour by combining it with mashed sweet potatoes from garden plots. Regular biscuits required flour slaveholders, rarely distributed generously, but sweet potatoes could bulk up dough while adding sweetness and moisture. Potatoes were roasted until soft, mashed smooth, then worked into flour with a bit of lard until soft dough formed. Baked near fire or in Dutch ovens, biscuits came out golden and tender with an orange tint. They were slightly sweet even without molasses, making them feel special compared to everyday cornbread. At Christmas, mothers might save flour for weeks, hiding it from children who would have eaten it as paste. The biscuits represented ingenuity, knowledge that ingredients could be combined into something greater than their parts. Each bite contained the care and planning of enslaved women determined to give their families something beautiful. Fried pork skins were a Christmas treat made from the skin of butchered hogs, cut into strips and fried in their own rendered fat until puffed and crispy. The skins started tough and rubbery, but heat transformed them into light, crunchy bites that shattered between teeth. Salt was the only seasoning needed, though some families added a sprinkle of pepper when available. Children gathered around the frying pot, eager to snatch the first pieces as they emerged golden and bubbling from the lard. The skins provided both protein and fat, essential nutrients during cold months when bodies needed extra fuel. At Christmas, there might be more skins available from the holiday butchering, turning what was usually a small treat into something approaching abundance. The crackling sound of frying skins announced the season as clearly as any carol. This dish represented the waste-nothing philosophy that enslaved communities developed. Every piece of the hog had value when survival depended on stretching resources to their absolute limits. Dried apple stack cake appeared at Christmas gatherings when families had managed to dry and preserve apples from fall harvests. The cake consisted of thin layers of molasses, sweetened dough, stacked high with spiced dried apple, filling between each layer. Making it required planning months ahead, drying apple slices in late summer, storing them carefully through autumn, then reconstituting them with water and spices when December arrived. Each layer was baked separately, requiring patience and careful fire management. The assembled cake needed to rest for days, allowing moisture from the apple filling to soften the dense layers into something tender and unified. Families who brought stacked cakes to Christmas gatherings earned respect for their foresight and skill. The cake represented the long view enslaved people took toward survival, understanding that today's labor could become tomorrow's celebration if done with care and intention. Each slice contained months of planning and hope. Okra soup was a Christmas dish connecting enslaved people directly to West African foodways where okra had been cultivated and cooked for centuries before the Middle Passage. The vegetable grew well in southern heat and was dried for winter use, the pods strung on thread and hung from cabin rafters. Reconstituted in water, the okra released its characteristic thick, silky texture that gave body to soups and stews. Combined with whatever meat or fish was available, onions and pepper, the soup became warming sustenance on cold December nights. The distinctive texture, slippery and substantial, was beloved by those who grew up with it and sometimes strange to others. At Christmas, okra soup might be richer than usual, made with more meat or served in larger portions. The dish represented cultural continuity, proof that African cooking traditions survived despite slavery's attempts to erase identity. Each bowl was an act of remembrance and resistance. Baked sweet potatoes were the simplest Christmas preparation. Whole potatoes buried in fireplace ashes and left to cook slowly until their skins charred and their flesh turned to orange silk. No recipe was needed, no special ingredients required, just potatoes and fire and time. The ash-baked potatoes developed a smokiness that oven-baked versions could never match, their sugars caramelizing against the charred skin into a flavor that tasted like the earth itself transformed. Children would watch the fire, waiting for the moment when potatoes were deemed ready, then juggle the hot tubers from hand to hand while the skin was peeled away. The flesh inside was creamy and sweet, needing nothing else, yet sometimes receiving a small pat of butter if available. At Christmas, families might bake more potatoes than usual, ensuring everyone had their fill of this humble abundance. The dish represented the fundamental truth that simple ingredients prepared with care could provide genuine satisfaction. Squirrel dumplings was a Christmas dish requiring hunting skill and patience, turning the small game that inhabited every southern woodland into hearty winter fare. Squirrels were plentiful and required less effort to catch than larger game, making them an accessible protein source for enslaved people with limited hunting time. The animals were cleaned, cut into pieces, and simmered with wild onions until the meat was tender and the broth rich. Dumplings made from cornmeal and water were dropped into the bubbling pot, where they puffed and absorbed the savory liquid. The result was filling and warming, a complete meal in a single pot. Fathers taught sons where to find squirrels and how to approach them quietly. The dish represented the skills enslaved communities developed to supplement meager rations, knowledge of the woods, understanding of animal behavior, and the patience to wait for the right moment. Each bowl contained earned protein and passed down wisdom. Fried corn cakes with sorghum appeared on Christmas morning tables, the simple cornmeal cakes elevated by drizzles of thick, dark syrup. The cakes were made from cornmeal, mixed with water or buttermilk when available, shaped into rounds, and fried in lard until golden on both sides. Sorghum syrup came from cane-like plants that some enslaved people were permitted to grow and process, the stalks crushed and the juice boiled down into amber sweetness. The combination was filling and sweet, providing energy for cold December days. Children loved the sticky sweetness, licking syrup from fingers and plates. The cakes required no special skill. Any child old enough to tend a fire could make them, yet they carried celebration in every bite. This dish represented how enslaved families created holiday spirit from the most basic ingredients, transforming cornmeal and syrup into something worth anticipating all year. Wild greens with vinegar was a Christmas side dish made from whatever edible plants could be foraged from winter fields and forest edges. Poke salad, lamb's quarters, dandelion greens, and other wild plants supplemented the cultivated collards and turnips from gardens. The greens were gathered by those who knew which plants were safe and which were poisonous. Knowledge passed carefully between generations. Cooked down with a splash of vinegar and whatever fat was available, the greens provided essential nutrients missing from the corn-heavy enslaved diet. At Christmas, wild greens might accompany the main dishes as a reminder that the land itself could provide sustenance to those who understood its offerings. Foraging represented freedom of a sort, the ability to find food beyond what slaveholders rationed. Each plate of greens contained wisdom about the natural world that no one could take away, knowledge that meant survival for those who possessed it. Corn pone with crackling gravy was a Christmas dinner that combined two preparations into something greater than either alone. The pone was dense cornbread baked in cast iron, its bottom crust golden and crispy from the hot pan. The gravy was made from pork cracklings, simmered with water and flour until thick and rich, seasoned with pepper and whatever drippings remained. Poured over wedges of hot corn pone, the gravy soaked into the bread, creating layers of texture, crispy and soggy, crunchy and smooth. The dish was filling and satisfying, stretching small amounts of pork flavor across large amounts of corn. At Christmas, the gravy might be richer than usual, made with more cracklings, saved specifically for the holiday. This combination represented the creativity enslaved cooks applied to limited ingredients, understanding that technique and combination could create satisfaction when abundance was impossible. Boiled peanuts were a Christmas snack made by simmering raw peanuts in heavily salted water for hours until the shells softened and the nuts inside became creamy and briny. The preparation transformed hard, crunchy peanuts into something entirely different, soft, salty, and addictively flavorful. Peanuts grew well in the small plots enslaved families were sometimes permitted to cultivate, making them one of the few crops people could control from planting to harvest. Boiled peanuts could be made in large batches and kept for several days, providing protein-rich snacks between meals. Children gathered around the pot, fishing out warm peanuts and cracking the soft shells with their teeth. The dish connected to African traditions of groundnut preparation and represented both cultural continuity and small acts of self-determination. Each handful was food grown, harvested, and prepared by enslaved hands without slaveholder involvement, a small but meaningful freedom. Rice and peas with ham bone appeared on Christmas tables in the coastal regions where rice cultivation made the grain available even to enslaved people. The dish was simple: rice and field peas cooked together in water, flavored by whatever ham bone remained from the slaveholder's table. The bone might have little meat left, but its smoky essence transformed plain starches into something worth savoring. The rice absorbed the cooking liquid, becoming fluffy and flavored, while the peas added earthiness and protein. This dish connected to African and Caribbean foodways, where rice and legumes form dietary foundations. At Christmas, the ham bone might be larger or meatier than usual, a small gesture that made the holiday meal feel more abundant. The dish represented both the cruelty of slavery, scraps from the master's table, and the dignity enslaved families maintained by transforming those scraps into nourishing, satisfying food that brought people together around a common pot. Which forgotten Christmas meal from slavery's kitchens surprised you most?
Cold cornbread and milk was often called the poor man's cereal, but it was more than a label. It was a lifeline. Day-old cornbread, often too dry to eat on its own, was crumbled into bowls and covered with milk or buttermilk, creating a filling meal that could be eaten quickly before school or work. For children, it was breakfast. For adults, it was sometimes supper, proving its versatility. It carried a tangy, comforting flavor that became familiar in many Southern households. What made it special was not the taste alone, but the reminder that nothing was wasted, not even stale bread. In communities with little to spare, this dish represented survival and practicality. Cold cornbread and milk was part of the rhythm of daily life, a dish that carried generations through hard times and into mornings of determination. Even with its simplicity, it gave people what they needed to keep going during days that demanded courage and endurance. Fried mullet with hush puppies brought the flavor of coastal mornings to inland tables, celebrating the bounty of southern waters. Fresh mullet fillets were seasoned and lightly dredged in cornmeal before being fried to a crisp golden finish, their mild flesh staying tender and flaky. Alongside the fish, cornmeal hush puppies sizzled in the same hot oil, forming round fritters with a crunchy crust and soft, savory interior. The combination delivered a contrast of textures and tastes that spoke of seaside breakfasts and family gatherings. Some cooks added chopped onions or jalapenos to the hush puppies for an extra kick, while others served lemon wedges to brighten the fish. This meal reminded families of fishing trips, coastal traditions, and the joy of bringing fresh catch straight from net to skillet. Fried mullet with hush puppies honored African-American ties to coastal communities and the creative spirit of cooks who turned fresh seafood and simple cornmeal into a feast worth waking up early for. Cornbread and buttermilk cups might seem humble, but in the hands of grandparents, they became something far richer than the ingredients suggested. Coffee milk for kids was one of those small morning rituals that made children feel grown. Even though the drink was mostly warm milk with only a tiny splash of coffee, parents and grandparents mixed it carefully, just enough coffee to tint the milk a light tan and add the faintest whisper of that roasted smell adults relied on to start their day. It was soothing, warm, and familiar. The kind of drink that made sleepy children perk up before school without giving them the full strength of adult coffee. Many African-American households use this as a way to include children in the morning rhythm, letting them feel part of the adult world while still keeping things gentle. The taste was mild and slightly sweet, especially when a bit of sugar was added, and it had a comforting creaminess that stuck with you long after the cup was empty. The mornings felt quieter back then, slower, filled with the soft sounds of spoons stirring and radios humming low in the background. Coffee milk was not just a drink, it was a moment, a shared start to the day that made you feel loved and included. Even now, the memory of that warm cup brings people back to kitchens filled with steam, conversation, and the steady comfort of family. Hoppin John morning bowl carried the luck and legacy of the South into every spoonful, blending black-eyed peas, fluffy rice, and smoky bacon for a meal steeped in tradition. Peas were simmered until tender with onions, garlic, and a hint of pork, then spooned over freshly cooked rice so the savory juices soaked into every grain. A sprinkle of green onions or a splash of pepper vinegar added brightness, while some cooks stirred in diced peppers for extra color and flavor. This dish had long been served on New Year's Day for prosperity, but in the 1970s, many African American families enjoyed it year-round as a hearty breakfast. It offered protein, fiber, and deep flavor that sustained workers and schoolchildren alike. Hoppin John morning bowl reminded each generation of the history carried in its ingredients, from West African roots to Southern kitchens, proving that food could nourish both body and spirit while keeping cultural memory alive with every bite of smoky, satisfying goodness. Salted fish cakes for breakfast carried a flavor that was bold, practical, and tied to tradition. Families made them by mixing scraps of salted fish with meal or leftover potatoes, shaping patties, and frying them crisp in a skillet. The result was savory, filling, and inexpensive, making it a reliable protein source when other meats were far out of reach. In coastal communities or areas where salted fish was a common trade, this dish became a morning standard, paired often with eggs if the household could spare them. Children sometimes found the taste strong, but adults appreciated its sustenance and the way it stretched simple ingredients. Fish cakes often carried the memory of family gatherings, with parents teaching children how to prepare them just as their parents once had. It was a dish that reflected survival, thrift, and culinary creativity, embodying how overlooked scraps could become the backbone of a morning meal. Salted fish cakes for breakfast held both history and hunger in balance, fueling resilience through humble bites. Sorghum syrup on hot biscuits was a rural breakfast tradition rooted in the fields and farms where sorghum was grown and milled long before maple syrup ever became common. The syrup was thick, earthy, and rich, with a sweetness that felt deeper than sugar. Grandparents would split open hot biscuits, steam rising, and drizzle sorghum across the soft center until it glistened. The flavor was bold and comforting, slightly smoky, and entirely unique. It tasted like the land itself, like seasons of harvest and the steady work of hands that knew how to make every ingredient count. Biscuits with sorghum were inexpensive, filling, and quietly indulgent in their own rustic way. Families loved them because the syrup lasted long, cost little, and carried the taste of home. Even today, those who grew up with sorghum syrup remember its distinct sweetness with a kind of affection that never fades. Buttered hominy with bacon brought a smoky, buttery aroma to African American breakfast tables of the 1970s, turning a humble grain into something rich and satisfying. White hominy kernels were simmered until tender, then sautéed in a heavy skillet with generous pats of butter. Crumbled strips of crisp bacon were folded in at the end, their savory fat blending with the buttery corn for layers of flavor. Some cooks added a sprinkle of black pepper or a pinch of red pepper flakes to deepen the taste, while others stirred in chopped green onions for brightness. Served alongside scrambled eggs or spooned over fresh cornbread, it offered hearty comfort that stuck with you through the morning. Buttered hominy with bacon celebrated both farm tradition and kitchen creativity, honoring a food once central to Native American diets and embraced by Southern cooks. Each bite carried the essence of smoky bacon and sweet corn, proving that simple, affordable ingredients could create a breakfast that felt luxurious without being complicated or costly. Leftover pie for breakfast was a common occurrence in large households where nothing was wasted. Sweet potato pie, chess pie, or fruit pies baked the night before were often sliced and eaten cold in the morning with coffee or milk. For children, it was an exciting way to begin the day, while adults saw it as practical and filling. It reflected the rhythm of large families, where every meal had to stretch, and desserts could not be reserved only for evenings. Leftover pie carried both joy and necessity, showing how households turned indulgence into sustenance. The flavors of cinnamon, nutmeg, and sweet roots lingered, making mornings brighter even when other meals were sparse. Eating pie for breakfast symbolized both frugality and comfort, a way of preserving energy and spirit in difficult times. Leftover pie for breakfast became a fond memory for many, a dish that reflected resilience and the creativity of stretching food in every way possible. How cakes with butter and sugar were the sweet breakfast treat that felt almost like dessert, even though they came from the simplest ingredients in the pantry. Made from cornmeal batter poured onto a hot skillet, each cake sizzled as it spread, forming a crisp edge and soft center that tasted perfect every single time grandparents would flip them with practiced ease, stacking them high and spreading butter that melted instantly into the warm surface. A sprinkle of sugar added just enough sweetness to make the hoe cakes feel like a special morning indulgence. They were quick, affordable, and comforting. The kind of food that made children sit down fast and quiet at the table. Hoe cakes were history and home all at once, a dish born from necessity that became a beloved tradition. Even now, the memory of that buttery sweetness lingers in the minds of anyone lucky enough to grow up with them.
Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to preserve these lost recipes and the stories they carry forward.